In the dim pre-dawn light, Denise Jenkins paused at the end of the marble corridor mop handle in trembling hands. A pair of executives stormed by, one sneering, "Don't let her scrub the boardroom. Can't trust those people with our floors." The words stung like acid. Denise's knuckles whitened as she gripped the mop, rage barreling through her calm facade. Invisible for so long, her very presence now unsettled them. She took a steadying breath, listening as their footsteps faded, then placed the mop bucket just so every spray perfectly aligned. Today she wouldn't let their contempt define her. Today the boardroom itself would learn who Denise Jenkins really was. If you've ever been underestimated or silenced, drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and tap the bell. You won't want to miss the next chapters of Denise's story. At 5:45 a.m. sharp, the lobby's motion sensors flickered the lights on, revealing Denise Jenkins in her faded gray uniform. The squeak of her mop cart echoed in the cavernous space, a lonely herald in the endless corridors of Creswell Holdings. For 15 years, Denise had arrived while the parking lot still lay in shadow, pushing that same cart past glass-walled offices and sleek elevators. To the rest of the staff, she was part of the decor, an unremarkable constant in a world of shifting hierarchies and polished egos. But to Denise, every corner she cleaned, every trash can she emptied, was another opportunity to watch, to learn to wait. She moved with the precision of a surgeon. Her rag was tucked neatly into her back pocket, ready to catch fingerprints from the company logo etched onto the glass walls. She navigated the maze of desks and cubicles like a ghost hands. Steady on the mop, eyes scanning every passing footstep and whispered conversation. No one ever spoke directly to her, and that was just how she liked it. Silence was her shield, anonymity, her camouflage. Yet some days the silence was deafening. On the fourth floor, a well-dressed marketing rep once tossed a half-eaten sandwich into the trash can instead of the bin beside it. Denise had retrieved the sandwich without a word, only to be met with a curt, "Make sure the carpet's dry before my 300 meeting." The arrogance in his tone could have crumbled mountains if Denise had let it. Instead, she smiled and nodded, filing away the memory like an entry in a ledger. The next day, he scuffed the same carpet with a coffee spill and blamed her for not drying it properly. She nodded again. That was her rhythm, observe, record, endure. Down the hall, the senior VP, Douglas Fairbanks, swaggered by one afternoon, his cologne a bitter reminder of entitlement. "Can you imagine working here all your life and still sweeping the floors?" he joked to his assistant, a snide laugh trailing behind them. Denise felt the weight of his words but refused to let them break her stride. She had something no one in that building did: ownership. Less than 2 weeks after her husband Roland's death in a highway accident, her supposed partner in business, Curtis Banning, had quietly erased her from Creswell's records. He thought she'd disappear. She didn't. Instead, she had spun an elaborate web of legal protections under another name, then slipped back into the company as Miss Denise, the janitor. Every night, she unearthed evidence of the company's decay bonus reports showing $55,000 payouts to CEOs. Safety violations swept under worn rugs. Warehouse drivers denied overtime they'd earned. She cataloged it all in a little black notebook: dates, names, quotes, clipped expense statements, photos of budget memos. She learned which hallway tiles were loose, which microwaves sparked, which office doors creaked. By the time she finished her rounds, she knew Creswell Holdings better than any executive. But for 15 years, she'd waited. She understood that timing was power. If she struck too soon, they'd dismiss her as a disgruntled widow. If she struck too late, they might discover her plan. So she endured slights, gathered documentation, and let them grow comfortable in their delusion of dominance. All the while, she maintained her perfect choreography. No fingerprints ignored, no crumb left behind. On one particularly cold December morning, Denise found herself outside the executive suite at 11:45 p.m. The hallway lit only by the glow of the conference room projector. Through the frosted glass, she heard Wexler's booming voice ridiculing frontline staff. "If you don't like your pay clock out, and try DoorDash," he taunted. Laughter followed, cold, cruel laughter. Denise stood there, mop and bucket forgotten, absorbing every word. She didn't need bitterness to fuel her. She needed clarity. The rot she'd observed had reached the core leaders who viewed employees as cogs, not humans. That night, she slipped into the records room wearing the ID badge she'd found months earlier. Under the hum of fluorescent lights, she compiled her final dossier. Notarized contracts, shareholder agreements bearing her signature proof of majority ownership since 2004. She emailed the files to Elliot Miles, the attorney she'd recruited, and texted him the password. It was time. As she left the building at dawn, the sky faintly tinged with pink. Denise felt no glee, only resolve. Back at her mop station, she retrieved her rag and began her usual routine. The motions unchanged. She wiped the elevator buttons, buffed the lobby floor, and straightened the coffee station. Everyone assumed she was simply another janitor preserving their pristine image. They didn't know that she was the one who could uproot their entire world, and she planned to do it on their own terms. And so the stage was set, a silent observer turned rightful owner armed with years of proof and perfect timing. As the city awakened beyond the lobby windows, Denise Jenkins finished her rounds and tucked her black notebook into her pocket. In an hour, the boardroom would learn exactly who Miss Denise really was and why no one should ever underestimate the power hidden behind a mop. Denise slipped into the building long before dawn, her footsteps echoing softly against the polished marble as her mop cart creaked behind her. The security guard barely glanced up. He'd seen her silhouette so many times he might have thought she belonged to the walls themselves. She nodded in passing cloak of anonymity, firmly in place. Once the lobby doors closed behind him, Denise exhaled the cool air of the underlit hallways, filling her lungs. This was her world before the world woke up, a shadow realm of hushed corridors and abandoned conference rooms. She began on the second floor, pausing at the threshold of a boardroom whose glass walls still bore the ghostly fingerprints of last night's power meeting. Denise knelt, unpacking her rag and wiping the printed company logo clean. Beneath her careful work, she glimpsed the residues of coffee rings and gum wrappers from long ago break room raids, little clues in the evidence trail she kept in her mind. Every stray wrapper was a story, every smudge a confession. Someone had stayed late, someone had snuck in donuts, someone had bragged about a big deal, won. She cataloged them all without judgment, only observation. As she moved on, her ears tuned to the faint hum of newly activated technology. Printers whirred to life in the corner office. Monitors flickered on across the cube farm. Denise listened for conversation, snatches of jargon execs trimming fat from budgets, directors comparing year-end bonuses. In one glass-walled office, she heard Douglas Fairbanks chuckle, "If you can't hit your targets, maybe stick to sweeping floors." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, it was casual. The sort of laughter that thrives on entitlement. Denise paused, fitting another rag into her pocket and quietly stepping inside. She pretended to clean the baseboards while two vice presidents backs to her debated which junior analyst to lay off next. "We'll cut her before the end of the quarter," one said, voice smooth as silk. "She's expendable." As they moved on to finer points, Denise's eyes flicked to the unguarded slip of a name on a sticky note. She memorized it and tucked it into her mental ledger. In the break room, the coffee machine hissed and dripped. Denise wiped down countertops still sticky with sugar granules. She watched as early birds assistants clutching folders lined up for their first cups. A marketing coordinator tapped out an email muttering, "We need more lead gen for Q3 or I'm toast." She didn't look up. Denise refilled the paper towel dispenser, fingers brushing against a scrap of printed strategy slides someone left behind. She slid it into her pocket for later review. Every scrap mattered. The building's service elevator proved invaluable. Denise rode it down to the basement where maintenance crews gathered around jerry-rigged coffee mugs and dusty beat-up chairs. They greeted her with friendly nods, unaware that she recorded their shifts and offhand comments as carefully as though they were board minutes. They spoke of broken forklifts, of cramped break schedules, of pay that never matched the hours they logged. Denise stored these details in her black notebook alongside the corporate transgressions she extracted upstairs. Back on the main floors, Denise encountered the executive washrooms, sleek and chrome. She polished the sinks, catching a glimpse of her own reflection, graying hair tucked into a ponytail, a uniform stained with wear. She had learned long ago that appearances could deceive. She imagined the shock on their faces when they realized that the woman they stepped around every day wasn't invisible at all, but indispensable. More than that, she was the owner they'd forgotten. In one of the corners, the Human Resources office awaited. Denise paused outside the frosted door, listening to hushed tones. Inside, a manager complained about a harassment claim using a dismissive tone that stung. She's just a temp, he said. Hard to invest in someone who won't be here in 6 months. Denise's jaw tightened. She didn't stop to fix the floor. There was nothing to clean here, but she took special note of the names and the date. She'd need to cross-reference that conversation with the official complaint logs. Hallway by hallway, she amassed a dossier of broken promises, petty cruelties, and systemic neglect. Her notebook bristled with details, the slip in the CEO's signature authorizing a bonus for unused vacation, the safety audit buried in the finance department's backlog, the offhand remark about letting the janitor clean it up when a water cooler leak threatened to stain the carpet. Every one of those incidents was a nail in the coffin of corporate complacency. At 9:30 a.m., the building stirred fully awake. Phones began to ring in unison. The murmur of greetings filled the corridors. Denise found herself in the lobby again, mop suspended mid-sweep, as executives in tailored suits brushed past. Their eyes were fixed on the glass escalators or their reflection in the polished steel planters. Not once did any of them see her face. She smiled to herself, folding her arms and leaning against the reception desk for a moment of respite. They would never imagine that their fate was entwined with hers, that the path she had walked for 15 years led straight to the boardroom on the 18th floor. Suddenly, a young intern from finance darted out of the elevator, clutching a stack of printouts. She paused as though to ask a question, then remembered Denise's reputation for discretion. With a sheepish grin, she whispered, "Miss Denise, can you show me where to get more paper for the fax?" Denise set aside her notebook, guiding the intern toward the supply closet with a patient nod. As they walked, Denise caught the names of everyone she passed. "Hey, Denise," from the receptionist. "Morning, Miss D," from the security guard. "Thanks." Miss Denise from the intern. Small courtesies, perhaps. But they were breadcrumbs leading to the truth that was about to be revealed. When the intern disappeared behind the supply closet's swinging door, Denise pressed her back against the wall. She watched the hallway, counting the steps to the executive elevators, calculating travel times, visualizing her entrance. Her chest tightened with anticipation. In a few short hours, she would step out of the shadows. But for now, she remained the silent observer, the janitor in gray, watching, listening, gathering the final pieces she needed to bring the entire house of cards crashing down. She retrieved her rag and resumed her sweeping, each stroke deliberate and lulling. The hustle of corporate life surged around her, oblivious to the storm gathering just beyond its gleaming surfaces. Denise Jenkins was patient. She would let them continue believing they controlled everything, while in reality she held their fate in her hands. And once the boardroom doors opened for the quarterly meeting, they would finally see her not as wallpaper, but as the architect of their reckoning. Denise remembered the heat of that August afternoon in Columbus, Georgia, as if it were yesterday. She and Roland sat at their narrow kitchen table, grocery receipts scattered between them like confetti after a party. The overhead light flickered, casting the cramped room into alternating pools of shadow and illumination. Roland's voice was low but excited as he traced a line on a crumpled napkin. Root costs fuel surcharges, projected margins. "We could undercut the big brokers by 5%, he said, eyes bright with possibility. "We just need a name." "Denise. Something that speaks to reliability." She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. The steam blurred the rims of her glasses. Behind her, the wall calendar marked the date her father had passed away 2 weeks earlier in a sudden heart attack. His life insurance payout a modest sum, but enough to loosen tight fists around dreams weighted in her bank account. Most people would have used that money for a down payment on a home or to pay off student loans. But to Denise, it felt like a calling. "Put it in my name," she told Roland quietly. "We'll use it as seed capital. I'll set up an LLC. Nobody needs to know how much there is." He paused, pencil hovering over the napkin. "Are you sure?" he asked, concern flicking across his features. Denise met his gaze, steady and resolute. "I trust you," she said. And in her heart, she knew he was the one to drive the business forward, to knock on doors and charm clients while she stayed behind the ledger. They found Creswell Logistics scribbled on the back of that napkin. Roland's suggestion, a name less about freight and more about stability. Within days, Denise had navigated the local courthouse's cramped clerk's office, filing articles of organization under a generic address and a third-party mailbox. She opened a small checking account in the LLC's name, deposited her inheritance, and logged in the first line of their balance sheet, capital contribution. Denise Jenkins. Roland rented a single office, in a drab strip mall just off the interstate exit where the hum of 18-wheelers was a constant reminder of the world they were entering. Curtis Banning, a childhood friend and former co-worker of Roland's uncle, dog-eared the door to join them as partner. Curtis brought contacts in trucking associations and a knack for schmoozing purchasing managers. Roland handled operations, assigning drivers, negotiating rates, ensuring loads moved on time. Denise, meanwhile, became the silent architect, drafting contracts, reconciling invoices, tracking receivables, and ensuring payroll ran on time. Their initial roster of clients consisted of 2 small manufacturers in Alabama, a paper supplier in South Carolina, and a local farm cooperative. Nights found Denise at the same kitchen table where dreams first sprouted. She updated Excel sheets on her battered laptop, typed up service agreements with meticulous care, and printed them on the garage sale printer that Roland had insisted on buying. She learned to decode freight tariff manuals and bonded shipping forms, weaving clauses to protect their liability and ensure timely payments. When Curtis voiced frustration over a late invoice, Denise drafted a polite but firm letter that brought a check through the door within days. Her calm precision became the backbone of the fledgling company's reputation. By the end of their first year, Creswell Logistics had outgrown the strip mall office. They moved to a modest downtown suite, 2 rooms where the front served as a reception area and the back housed a desk, 2 fold-up chairs and a fax machine that jammed half the time. Roland and Curtis furnished the space with hand-me-down office chairs and a beat-up filing cabinet. Denise insisted on branded letterhead and business cards printed on heavy stock, insisting that presentation mattered as much as performance. She never appeared at client meetings, preferring to stay behind the scenes, but every contract bore her signature in fine script. Their second year saw a surge in business. A regional paper distributor signed a volume contract that required deft coordination and a big deposit. Denise tracked every mile, every pallet, and every freight claim. She met deadlines for insurance certificates, prepared monthly financial statements, and handled payroll for a growing roster of drivers. Roland secured new routes to Florida, while Curtis courted a national retailer looking to bypass expensive brokers. They hired their first employee, an office assistant, whose job was to answer calls and refill the coffee pot. By year 3, the company was a rising star in Georgia's logistics scene. Industry magazines featured Creswell Logistics as a fast up-and-comer, and Roland and Curtis joined panels at local trade shows. Denise stayed home with their newborn daughter, watching live streams and fielding texted updates on her phone. She barely missed the spotlight. The thrill she felt came not from applause, but from balance sheets that balanced and contracts that closed. Her loyalty to anonymity was a deliberate choice. She knew that ownership brought entanglement, scrutiny, and challengers. But in the winter of that 3rd year, fate intervened. A late-night delivery to a client in Atlanta went tragically wrong. Roland, driving home on icy highways, lost control and was killed in a single-car accident. Denise learned of his death at dawn, the call coming through like a thunderclap. Curtis arrived at her doorstep, flanked by lawyers and police offering condolences and discussing next steps. Denise, reeling in anguish, watched as Curtis drafted a lackluster eulogy and finalized a succession plan without consulting her. He spoke of honoring Roland's legacy, but his words felt hollow, a thin veneer over his ambition. Curtis moved quickly. He filed paperwork removing Roland's name from the company's internal directory and rerouted key financial controls to himself. Internally, he began to refer to himself as co-founder in client pitches, omitting any mention of Denise. He assumed she'd vanish, overwhelmed by grief. But grief only fueled Denise's resolve. She possessed the original articles of organization, the subscription agreements signed by Curtis and Roland, and bank statements proving her equal contribution. Her hidden LLC was not a shell. It was the legal fortress that safeguarded her husband's dream and her own. She did not storm the office in day-glow vengeance. She waited, observing as Curtis assumed the mantle of leadership. Within 6 months, Creswell had rebranded under a new logo, a sleek, stylized C that Curtis unveiled at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Denise attended in her mother's old sedan, driving past the gleaming sign without feeling the slightest pang of entitlement. She watched Curtis bask in praise, shaking hands with mayors and Chamber of Commerce types while she slipped into the building after hours, scanner in hand, documenting every misstep he glossed over. Missed insurance renewals, underpaid driver settlements, and contracts he had signed without her meticulous oversight. Curtis believed he had outpaced any challenge to his authority. He hired a young MBA, Thomas Wexler, to modernize operations to scale the business beyond its regional roots. Wexler brought swagger and sleek PowerPoint decks. He never suspected that a woman in a janitor's uniform knew more about the company's intricacies than he did. Curtis, convinced that Denise was too invested in paperwork and domestic matters, paid her respect in obligatory condolence gifts, but relegated her to the margins. The janitor's world, he joked to Wexler one day, brushing past Denise without a glance. And so for nearly a decade, the enterprise thrived under Curtis's superficial luster and Wexler's MBA charisma, while Denise maintained her watchful presence, collecting receipts, recording conversations, and tracking share distributions through an LLC structure that Curtis did not suspect. She understood that her power lay not in the boardroom but in the fine print in the articles of organization that bore her name alongside Rowland's, and in the quiet certainty that the company could not exist without her stake. By 2007, Creswell Logistics had become a $50 million operation, warehouse expansions, new shipping lanes, and a client roster that spanned the Southeast. Yet Denise remained the ghost in the machine, trading her elegant office attire for a janitor's uniform so she could navigate the building unseen. She knew every nook of the headquarters, every boardroom where Curtis and Wexler plotted, every executive washroom echoing with self-congratulatory laughter. But she also knew the truth. What happens when those in power forget the foundations upon which their empires are built? In the present day, as the dawn of another morning broke over the marble lobby, Denise felt the weight of both her past and her future press upon her shoulders. She recollected that kitchen table in Georgia, the grocery receipts, the flutter of hope in Rowland's eyes, and the quiet determination she summoned to protect their shared vision. All of that momentum, Rowland's ambition, Curtis's cowardice, her own strategic patience, culminated in her silent vigil as a janitor. There was no fanfare in her journey, no grand announcement when she first set up the LLC, no public pardon when Curtis sidelined her. Instead, she had chosen a different path, one of camouflage and restraint, gathering every shred of evidence and refining her resolve until the moment was ripe. And now, as she pressed her rag to the glass wall bearing the company's logo, her reflection merged with the corporate symbol, a visual reminder that the true founder, the one who had invested blood, sweat, and tears into this enterprise, had never been erased. Denise straightened and placed the rag back in her pocket. The graphing of freight costs on her mind had given way to the lines of her own story, one written in legal documents and lived in the quiet hours before anyone else stirred. With a last glance at the polished lobby, she turned her cart and moved forward, the echo of her wheels a soft drumbeat, heralding the truth that would soon break through every pane of glass in Creswell Holdings. The morning after the accident, Denise walked into the strip mall office with a numbness she couldn't shake. Rowland's old desk sat empty, its glossy surface wiped clean of the coffee rings and memo pads he'd left behind. The walls felt taller without his easy laugh bouncing off them. Curtis stood by the window, arms folded, staring out, as though he'd grown used to loss. He offered no hug, no tear-stained condolences, only a curt nod that said more in its silence than words ever could. Denise cleared her throat. I need to see the shareholder agreement, she said, voice cracking. Curtis turned his face, schooled into an expression of solemn professionalism. Of course, he replied, waving a hand toward the filing cabinet. He slid out a drawer, rifled through folders, and produced a single stapled copy. Denise took it, her fingers trembling as she traced the typewritten lines, Creswell Logistics articles of incorporation member interests. Her name was there, quiet, almost hidden alongside Rowland's. But below Curtis's name now appeared in every signature block beneath the board resolutions. Why isn't my name on the board? Minutes, Denise asked, swallowing. The words felt jagged. Curtis folded his arms. Mrs. Jenkins, he said slowly. We felt it was best to consolidate leadership in one voice until things stabilized. He didn't see the flash of hurt in her eyes, didn't hear the crack in her heart. To him, her inquiries were a nuisance, an unwelcome reminder of the emotional complexities he preferred to ignore. Over the following weeks, Denise retreated into her work at home, her grief a tightening band around her chest. She kept up with the company's financial reports sent to her via proxy email, noting line items and budget variances. At night, she read articles about Creswell's growth under Curtis's impulsive expansions, new warehouses in Charleston and Savannah, a flashy relocation of headquarters to a high-rise. When the company newsletter arrived, her name was conspicuous by its absence. Curtis's smiling face accompanied every announcement. Still, Denise clung to her anonymity. She mourned Roland's death with quiet dignity, refusing to let anger cloud her decision-making. She believed in the company they had built together. Yet each press release that omitted her contribution, each internal memo that excluded her input felt like a stitch pulled from her fabric of memories. Curtis assumed she'd abandoned the enterprise, that the pain would drive her away. But pain only sharpened her focus. She turned over the idea of returning undercover in her mind. If she could see the company from the inside, where silence reigned and titles were hollow, she could build her case. But first she needed to gather proof of Curtis's misconduct. She dusted off the black notebook she'd used to log freight claims and invoices. Now it would serve a new purpose, documenting betrayal. She scribbled notes on her kitchen table late into the night, rereading email headers, tracking bonus distributions, plotting her next move with a careful hand. Meanwhile, Creswell's board of directors convened in glass-walled suites. Denise watched from the shadows, literally. She began to hover at the periphery of Curtis's office, posing as a delivery driver, a facilities inspector, anyone whose badge wouldn't raise suspicion. She learned the rhythms of executive life, the morning briefings, the investor calls, the awkward lunch receptions where Curtis banged his fist on the table to emphasize a point. Each outburst, each miscalculation she cataloged. When he hushed a VP's safety concerns with a dismissive wave, she took mental note of the date, time, and exact words. "We'll worry about safety when we worry about profits." Over the next year, Creswell's ascent continued on the heels of overextension. Curtis chased shiny contracts in unfamiliar markets without Denise's careful risk assessments. He cut corners on insurance, delayed maintenance, and slashed overtime budgets to prop up quarterly results. Drivers grumbled, leaning on their horns in the lot as their complaints bounced off the HR department's locked mailbox. But the board, dazzled by rising share value, sang praises of Curtis's visionary leadership. Denise's heart ached for the company she and Roland had nurtured. She remembered Roland's hands, calloused from steering the wheel of a delivery truck and later from shaking hands in crowded loading docks, and she wondered what he would think of the bloated juggernaut Creswell had become. She pictured his steady gaze and knew he'd never have allowed such reckless growth without her checks and balances. One evening, after visiting the crash site on I-85 to lay a single rose, Denise returned to her hidden office in the basement of the old strip mall. She unlocked a safe behind a false panel in the copier room and retrieved the original subscription agreement, Roland's signature bold and unmistakable, her own in delicate script. She spread it on the table beside the documents Curtis had filed months after Roland's passing. The contrast was stark. Curtis's legal maneuvers had erased her from the narrative, but the law was on her side. Her plan crystallized. She would reclaim her visibility on her own terms. She had arranged for a trusted attorney, Elliot Miles, to prepare the necessary filings once she signaled the green light. But she needed one final stretch of reconnaissance to secure the incontrovertible proof of Curtis's misdeeds. She slipped into the janitor's uniform that would later become her armor and began her 15-year vigil, cleaning floors by day, scouring files by night. On her first day back as a janitor, she felt the subtle shift in her spirit. She navigated the corridors with new purpose, her mop bucket serving as mobile concealment for her recorder and camera phone. Executives still sneered, still cracked jokes about sweeping up after failures, unaware of the woman beneath the uniform. But Denise no longer recoiled. She smiled politely, then slipped away to a quiet corner to document another instance of mismanagement. This time a warehouse lease that cost the company $500,000 more than market rate, signed off by none other than Curtis with no competitive bids sought. With each entry in her black notebook, her resolve deepened. She logged the date, March 12, 2008, time 2:15 p.m., location boardroom C. Curtis tells CFO to ignore the safety audit. We'll just pay the fine if something happens. She taped the minute tickers to her cart, ensuring she could relay the precise moment. The data began to form a web of negligence and opportunism, a tapestry of betrayal that Curtis had stitched with his own hands. As the months passed, Denise's notebook swelled with evidence. She recorded email leaks where Curtis bragged about shaving fuel costs by delaying maintenance, endangering drivers. She captured voice memos of a VP complaining that Curtis had diverted bonus pools to personal consulting fees, leaving frontline staff with hollow pay stubs. She compiled cost analysis spreadsheets that showed massive honeypot line items labeled executive perks, funded by slashing safety budgets and freezing raises for custodians, the very people who now hauled her mop buckets. Curtis remained oblivious, convinced that his polished presentations and relentless charisma would shield him from scrutiny. He remained the face of Creswell Logistics, attending ribbon cuttings in silk ties and offering keynote speeches on innovating supply chains. Meanwhile, Denise, cloaked in her gray uniform, wove herself through the building's veins. She felt the pulse of every department, the terse emails from HR, the muffled sobs of a warehouse worker whose overtime was canceled, the swaggering confidence of executives who believed the company's ascent justified any compromise. Then came the day that sealed her conviction. Denise overheard Curtis in a hallway conference with Wexler, another CEO brought in to optimize growth. The two men chuckled about an upcoming board vote where they'd accelerate a risky acquisition. "By the time the auditors catch up, we'll have doubled our market share," Curtis crowed. Wexler nodded, flashing a predatory grin. "It's perfect. They'll swallow it once they see the numbers." Denise pressed her back against the wall, heart pounding. She recorded the entire conversation, saving it as her most damning evidence yet. Here was the admission of willful financial gamble, of corporate irresponsibility that could drag the company into ruin. If Curtis and Wexler believed that she was only a mop-wielding janitor, they had grossly underestimated her and underestimated the power of her quiet watchfulness. That night, back at her basement enclave, Denise played back the recording on her laptop. She formatted the files, encrypted them, and tucked them safely into her hard drive. She synchronized the data with Elliot's secure portal, ensuring her attorney had full access. Then she closed her notebook pages, brimming with testimony, and exhaled. The betrayal had been unearthed. The timing was theirs to choose. As dawn broke over Creswell's headquarters once more, Denise did not rush to the boardroom. Instead, she began her day as any other, wiping down elevator buttons, straightening hallway brochures, offering a polite good morning to the receptionist. She passed the executive elevators, her reflection merging with their polished doors. No one paused. The building remained blind to the storm about to emerge. Yet beneath that silence, the seeds of reckoning lay dormant. And Denise Jenkins, the woman they had discarded, would be their reckoning, patient, powerful, and precise when she finally stepped from the shadows and claimed what was rightfully hers. Denise folded the crumpled flyer into her pocket and studied it under the flickering street lamp. Creswell Holdings, night janitorial staff needed. It was pinned to the community board at the corner cafe, tucked between ads for guitar lessons and babysitting services. She looked up at the sleek glass tower of Creswell's headquarters across the street, its offices dark for the night, and felt a familiar pulse of anticipation. 15 years earlier, she and Roland had built this company from the ground up. Now it was time to reclaim it from within. The next morning, she stood at the human resources desk in a uniform borrowed from the second-floor supply closet. Gray trousers crisply pressed a name tag that read, "Miss Denise," and polished black shoes replacing her worn sneakers. The receptionist barely glanced at her as she signed in. Denise offered a courteous nod and slipped past, mop and bucket in hand, her presence as unremarkable to them as the new leather chairs in the boardroom. She pushed her cart into the lobby, noting the updated carpets and fresh potted plants, luxury touches added under Curtis's regime. Beneath the undercurrent of air conditioning, she heard the faint buzz of the security panel arming itself. She knew the schedule by heart. Doors locked at 6:00 p.m. Cleaning crews free to roam until the early morning hush broke at 4:30 a.m. This window would be her domain. From the start, Denise's routine blended seamlessly with her covert mission. She swept the marble floors with practiced grace, the mop's rubber wheels whispering on tile. Yet every pause, every glance behind frosted glass was calculated. She began cataloging the executive's after-hours habits, envelopes of expense forms hidden in desk drawers, half-empty wine bottles stashed in conference room credenzas, late-night conference calls with no mute button. Using her phone's voice recorder discreetly tucked in her rag, she captured snatches of conversations echoing in the atrium. Her black notebook snagged from her kitchen desk at home unfolded within the lobby's shadows. Receipts from catered events, invoices marked executive retreat, and confidential memos printed on watermarked paper filled its pages. Her handwriting knotted around names and dates. September 14, 2007, Curtis and Wexler discussing bonus restructuring in boardroom BVO. We'll shave off staff OT. We can't afford to share the pie. She closed the notebook with a soft snap, sliding it into her cart's hidden compartment. Each entry was a stitch in the tapestry of evidence she wove. On her second week as Miss Denise, she encountered the first test of her cover. A junior analyst, bleary-eyed and clutching a stack of presentations, spilled coffee near the lobby's east entrance. As the analyst scrambled for napkins, Denise swooped in with her rag and a tilt of her head. "I've got it," she said, voice gentle. The young woman blinked, embarrassed, but nodded gratefully. "Thank you," she mumbled. Denise smiled, then led her to a janitor's mop bucket so she could dispose of the stain properly. The analyst thanked her again before darting off. Denise watched her go, filing away the analyst's name and division. That small kindness built goodwill and trust that would allow her access to places employees normally avoided cleaning in daylight. In the weeks that followed, Denise's surveillance deepened. She mapped the hierarchy of the cleaning schedule alongside the executive calendar. She timed when the senior VPs left, ensuring she could slip past the guard's line of sight on the upper floors. She learned that Curtis preferred to clear his desk thrice weekly, hiding his personal correspondence among shipping documents. One night she found a discarded expense report crumpled in a trash bin. Curtis, private jet fuel, $22,000. She smoothed it out on her mop bucket, flattened the creases, and tucked it into her notebook. It was textbook misuse of company funds, a smoking gun she could not ignore. Safety violations became another obsession. Denise discovered that one of the rear fire exits was chained shut, an illegal shortcut Curtis had approved to prevent late-night intruders. She took a photograph with her phone, careful to angle it so the timestamp recorded her evidence. That same evening, she dropped a note under the door of the safety officer's office: "Check east stairwell. Chained." By morning, the stairwell was open and the safety officer scratched his head, wondering who'd tipped him off. Denise only nodded to herself as she wheeled her cart past. Denise's uniform granted her anonymity, but her mind remained razor-sharp. In the loading dock area, she befriended the warehouse drivers Griffin, Marisol, and JT, who often waited for their next shift. They assumed she was simply dependable, the one janitor who never cut corners. They spoke freely in her presence, cursing slowed workflows, demanding overtime approvals, and joking about Curtis's golden parachute. She jotted down their grievances with a clip of her pen and later cross-checked wage statements to verify unpaid overtime. Each confirmed injustice became another cornerstone of her dossier. The executive washrooms were treasure troves of overheard secrets. Denise timed her cleaning schedule to coincide with after-hours board meetings. As she polished chrome fixtures, she caught fragments. "We'll only do the bare minimum on healthcare. We need to shore up profits before year-end. If anyone leaks this, we wash our hands of it." She always tucked her rag over the recorder's microphone, capturing every intonation. Later, alone in her hidden office, she transcribed these whispers into full searchable entries, each time stamped, each attributed to a speaker. Occasionally, Denise confronted her own restraint. It would have been easy to storm into Curtis's office with her notebook demanding answers. But she maintained her composure, knowing the value of timing. When she saw Curtis sneer at a janitor being scolded for a minor spill, her lips curved into a soft smile. That act of petty cruelty, office politics, and microcosm served as a reminder she was both witness and judge, biding her moment. The more Denise dug, the more she realized the breadth of corporate decay. Vendor contracts were rewired to funnel kickbacks. Employees were laid off under the guise of streamlining, only to be replaced by lower-paid temps. The cafeteria's healthy meal options were replaced with cheap vending machines to save costs, while the executive lounge thrived on gourmet catering. She cataloged menu receipts stamped "executive use only," evidence of two-tier privilege. Toward the end of her first year back undercover, Denise uncovered a particularly egregious scheme. Curtis and Wexler had structured a performance bonus pool that siphoned funds from essential maintenance budgets. The warehouse drivers had begun using broken forklifts, magnifying injury risks. One evening, Denise found a letter in the maintenance supervisor's outbox. "We can't fix that lift until next quarter. Substitute broom handles for now." She photographed the letter and stuffed the original into her notebook. Then she left an anonymous note on the supervisor's desk. Check rotor alignment before next shift. By dawn, the lift was tagged out and a new maintenance order had been issued. Each act of covert intervention tested her discipline. She knew that once her evidence was complete, she would move to reclaim her rightful position. Until then, she would remain Miss Denise, the invisible janitor, with a mop that gleamed like a baton, conducting the symphony of surveillance she orchestrated. 15 years after she first slipped into Creswell's lobby as a grief-stricken investor, Denise had become the company's most feared silent sentinel. Her uniform allowed her to penetrate every domain from polished boardrooms to cluttered archives. Her notebook brimmed with proof of financial misconduct, safety failures, and abusive management. And her resolve, forged in the fires of betrayal and legal cunning, burned brighter than any fluorescent lobby light. One crisp October morning, as the sun rose over Birmingham's skyline, Denise paused in the lobby with her mop paused mid-sweep. The day's schedule had been set in motion. She would conclude her final nightly sweep that evening, extract her hidden files, and deliver her dossier to Elliot Miles. He would file the emergency shareholder meeting papers at sunrise. By the next day's dawn, the boardroom doors would open to a very different form of maintenance, one guided not by Curtis's self-interest, but by justice and rightful ownership. As she rinsed her mop in the stainless steel sink and hung it to dry, Denise's pulse thrummed with anticipation. She smoothed out her uniform, returned her name tag to Miss Denise, and stepped back into the shadows of the hallway. Behind every clean floorboard and wiped elevator button lay a story waiting to be told. And soon the world she'd observed so patiently would finally see what the janitor had discovered. The company was rotten at its core, and it was time for the rot to be exposed. Night after night, after the building's last lights flickered off and security cameras slipped into their infrared glow, Denise slipped from the lobby toward the heart of Creswell Holdings' secrets. The corridors were hushed carpeted floors, muffling the soft click of her shoes. Her mop cart lay folded in a supply closet tonight. It was a decoy. In its steady stead, she carried a small LED flashlight, a stack of manila folders, and her black notebook, its pages already heavy with the first chapters of corporate decay. She began in the break room where early that afternoon someone had tossed last week's expense reports in the trash can. Denise knelt beside the bin, spreading discarded papers across the countertop. One flap read, Executive Compensation Q2, another bonus distribution summary. She snapped photos with her phone, careful to angle each shot so the text read clearly. Then she rifled through the crumpled sheets until she found the one she needed most, Thomas Wexler's $55,000 performance bonus. Her breath caught same quarter janitorial meal stipends cut by 20%. The injustice of it sharpened her focus. From there, she drifted down the hallway to the records room, a sanctuary of gray filing cabinets and dusty binders. The lock disengaged under her manager's borrowed key, an artifact she'd found months earlier in a random desk drawer. Inside, she activated her flashlight and scanned shelf after shelf of cardboard boxes labeled contracts, invoices, HR files. She pulled one labeled Vendor Agreements 2009 to 2011 and opened it. Beneath weighty contracts were monthly utility bills, mileage reimbursements, and memorandums, some stained with coffee, most stamped confidential. Denise skimmed past shipment invoices until she found a folder marked Employee Benefits. Inside lay meeting minutes where cost-saving measures were penciled in, including the decision to cut custodial meal stipends without ever notifying the cleaning staff or adjusting their workload. She took a photo of the handwritten margin note, Reduce janitorial spend. They'll eat at home if they have to. A chuckle echoed in her mind. She remembered Curtis and Wexler trading barbs at the quarterly retreat about how they just pretend to work while we do the heavy lifting. That mocking tone clung to her like a stain. Her phone's flashlight illuminated another shelf where personnel files sat in neat rows. Denise extracted one labeled Cynthia Ramirez, the janitor who'd cried over her son's accident leave request. She snapped a photo of the denial letter, insufficient coverage. It said, then jotted an entry in her notebook. April 13th, 2014. Cynthia's leave refused. Safety officer notified anonymously. Each note felt like a chisel strike on a hidden wall. Sooner or later, the edifice of lies would collapse. A soft thud in the hallway jolted her. Denise froze, breath held. Security guard on round, she guessed. She pressed herself against the back wall of the records room. heart pounding until the guard's footsteps receded. When silence returned, she exhaled and wiped her palms discreetly on her uniform before resuming her work. At a corner desk, she found a computer terminal logged in no password prompt. Beneath the keyboard lay printed emails, threads of conversations between Curtis and Wexler about accelerating bonus payouts even as safety budgets shrank. Denise screenshot the email header, the text, the timestamp. She paused at a line, "Let the janitor clean it up later. We must present growth to the board." Her stomach churned. That phrase, "let the janitor clean it up," would become the tagline of her exposé. Next, she turned her attention to financial statements stored in a locked cabinet. She located the key taped beneath the desk, another treasure she had filched weeks ago. Late 2010's balance sheet revealed funds earmarked for warehouse repairs that had never been spent. Instead, they'd been diverted to executive development programs, a meager excuse for lavish corporate retreats. Denise photographed the ledger entry $120,000, Executive Leadership Summit, Miami. She closed the folder with a decisive click and moved on. In the corner, a desktop printer hummed quietly, still loaded with uncollected pages. Denise rifled through the printed stack vendor questionnaires. Safety inspection logs marked review later, and a memo confirming a $10,000 fine for disabling fire exits during a budget review. She collected the printouts and slid them into her manila folder, then tucked the originals under a nearby stack of blank paper to mask her intrusion. Before leaving, she tucked her notebook into the folder and jotted a summary. Q2 Wexler bonus $55K versus janitor meal cut. Concrete evidence. Employee safety violations ignored. Fire exit forklift delays. Vendor contract manipulations, expense redirections. The entries were precise bullet points of misconduct anchored by dates and document references. Each line was a promise the truth would be revealed. Denise exited the records room and proceeded to the executive washroom, her favorite eavesdropping post. The air was cool and scented with mahogany polish. She cleaned the mirrors with practiced strokes. Mop rag doubled as recording device cover. Voices drifted from the corridor, a manager griping, "We can't let these people think they deserve more than crumbs," and a voice she recognized as Wexler's responding with a laugh. The door opened slightly. Denise froze, then twisted the rag for leverage, jamming it into the door's gap as a makeshift wedge. The voices receded. She rewound the recorder on her phone and slipped it into her pocket, the file saved. Back in the lobby, Denise washed her hands in the restroom sink and stared at her reflection. The name tag Miss Denise glinted under the fluorescent light, a badge she wore with quiet pride. When the elevator arrived, she stepped inside, pressing the button for the loading dock level. Security cameras swept the lobby, but her uniform offered perfect cover. They recognized only a janitor, not Creswell's true owner. Down in the loading bay, she greeted the night shift drivers by name. Griffin adjusting his safety vest. Marisol sipping cold coffee, exchanging innocuous pleasantries. They thought her a dedicated colleague, but she was gathering final confirmations of their grievances. Each complaint about unpaid overtime, broken safety gear, reduced benefits she matched to the documents she'd collected. Her folder bulged with evidence, a digital dossier and a paper trail that would be impossible to deny. Before dawn, Denise returned to her own apartment, a modest space miles away, and spread her haul across the living room floor. Files, photos, printouts, scribbled notes, an avalanche of truth. She connected her encrypted drive to her laptop and began uploading everything to Elliot Miles's secure server. The night's work emails, contracts, financial ledgers disappeared into a legal fortress. When the progress bar reached 100%, she disconnected and exhaled, feeling the weight of 15 years lift slightly from her shoulders. Her black notebook lay open on the table, its pages a testament to her patience and precision. She flipped through the entries, each a silent witness to Wexler's greed, Curtis's negligence, and the board's complacency. As dawn's first light slanted through the curtains, Denise stared at the final blank page. Tomorrow she would begin writing the opening of her reckoning, a shareholder notice demanding an emergency meeting. But tonight she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. In the hush before the world awoke, Denise Jenkins, the janitor known for her spotless floors, had become the architect of corporate justice. Her dossier was complete, her resolve unshakable. The The rot had been exposed, and soon the world would know the truth, hidden behind Creswell Holdings' gleaming facade. Denise sat behind this wheel of her aging sedan headlights, cutting a narrow path through the pre-dawn haze. The world felt off-kilter. Her stomach churned with equal parts indignation and resolve. Just hours earlier, she'd learned that Cynthia Ramirez, the janitor whose son lay in a Birmingham hospital after a terrible accident, had her emergency leave request flatly denied. The Human Resources Office had shrugged, citing insufficient coverage. Denise remembered the raw anguish in Cynthia's voice as she tried to plead her case, saw the tears she fought to hold back. It was enough. The quiet surveillance of 15 years had amassed a dossier of malfeasance. Now it was time to activate the legal fuse and watch the boardroom ignite. By 7:00 a.m., Denise reached the exit ramp for US 280 and pulled into the gravel parking lot of a roadside diner, a greasy spoon with flickering neon and the comforting aroma of burnt coffee. She slipped inside, scanning the vinyl booths until she spotted Elliot Miles, already seated in a corner dark suit juxtaposed against the cafe's well-worn linoleum. He looked up from his cup of black coffee, concern flickering in his eyes as he saw her gray uniform. "You called?" he asked quietly, setting the mug down. A waitress approached, pen poised, but Denise shook her head. "Not yet," she said, meeting Elliot's gaze. "Just water, please." Elliot waved off the waitress. "Tell me what changed," he said, voice low. Denise reached into her tote bag and retrieved the small flash drive she'd concealed in one of the manila folders. She placed it on the table between them. "Cynthia's denied leave," she said softly. "They told her she's expendable despite her son's condition." That was the tipping point. Elliot nodded, eyeing the drive. "I've seen the files you uploaded for me last night," he replied. "Contracts, bonus reports, safety violations, enough to start an avalanche. But you need a legal mechanism to trigger a formal takeover." He flipped open a well-worn legal pad. "Are you ready to move forward?" Denise took a breath, listening to the diner's hum, the clink of dishes, the hiss of the griddle, the low murmur of early patrons. "I've been ready," she said, "for a long time. But I needed the right spark." Her fingers brushed the flash drive's metal casing. It felt like the ignition key to a sleeping giant. "I need you to draft the shareholder meeting notice. Emergency session. No public announcement until everyone's in the room." Elliot nodded and tapped his pen against the notepad. "We'll need to cite the original shareholder agreement, highlight your majority stake, and issue a call under Section 4.2. Written notice at least 24 hours in advance. We'll specify an agenda vote of no confidence in the CEO request for new board elections and ratification of your appointment as acting chair." He paused, looking at Denise with calm intensity. "Is that what you want?" She nodded. "Yes. I want them blindsided. They'll walk in expecting another routine quarterly meeting. Instead, they'll get a legal bombshell. I want Curtis Wexler, everyone to realize the moment they open that folder that I've been running this place all along." Elliot flipped to a fresh page. "I'll draft the notice and the resolution language. You'll need to sign it as Denise Jenkins, majority shareholder, under penalty of perjury. We'll set the meeting for tomorrow morning at 10. That gives us just over 24 hours, plenty of time to circulate the notice to the board, but not enough for Curtis to rally support or bury the agenda." Denise sipped her water, steadying herself. The plan had crystallized in her mind. She imagined board members gathering in their leather chairs, expecting to discuss market forecasts only to see vote on CEO termination spelled out in black and white. Her pulse quickened at the thought. "Make it airtight," she said. "No loopholes. If they challenge it, I want them to drown in their own paperwork." Elliot tapped his pen again. "Understood. I'll prepare the documents and meet you back here in 2 hours. We'll sign, seal, and hand-deliver them to the corporate secretary and the board's registered agent." He looked around the diner. "You want to eat?" Denise shook her head, but her stomach clenched with hunger she refused to acknowledge. "Not now. Time is of the essence." She rose the chair, scraping against the floor. "I'll arrange for the copies. Put them in sealed envelopes with the notice and agenda. No one sees them until they arrive at the boardroom door." Elliot slid the flash drive into his jacket pocket and stood. "I'll get to work," he said. "Stay visible, Denise. You're still the janitor until the second those shares are recognized." His words reminded her even now she wore the uniform of the underdog concealed in plain sight. Back at her car, Denise unfolded a handwritten list. Board members' names, contact extensions, personal email addresses, the corporate secretary's direct line. She placed sealed envelopes into the trunk and drove to Creswell's headquarters. Her sneakers swapped for the black loafers she'd borrowed for this mission. The lobby was alive with midday bustle interns huddled in groups, executives darting between elevators. Denise greeted the security guard by name as she passed Morning Fred and continued to the admin office where the corporate secretary Olivia Trent looked up in polite surprise at her uniformed figure. "Miss Denise, what can I do for you?" Olivia asked, pen poised above a desk calendar. "I have these for delivery," Denise said, sliding the envelopes across the counter. "For the board. Confidential, signed by Mrs. Jenkins." Olivia hesitated, then slid them into a lined inbox marked board meeting notices. She didn't ask questions. The trust Denise had cultivated over the years paid off, now letting her plant the seeds of upheaval in the most guarded corner of Creswell's bureaucracy. With her task complete, Denise returned to the lobby. Her reflection multiplied in the polished granite pillars. She could feel the momentum-shifting corridors humming with the unknowing whispers of a coming storm. She pressed her hand to the cool stone and exhaled a silent promise that the tide was turning. By mid-afternoon, Elliot's call confirmed the notice was ready and the envelopes had been delivered. He reminded Denise to keep her routine unchanged, mop the lobby clean, the executive washroom sweep every stray crumb from the cafe floor. As far as the company was concerned, Miss Denise was still the invisible janitor. All the better. The less attention she drew, the more dramatic her revelation would be. That evening after her shift, Denise sat alone at the diner booth once more, this time accepting a simple cheeseburger and coffee. She watched her attorney at work flipping through his draft of the notice. She reviewed the legalese pursuant to Section 4.2 of the amended and restated operating agreement. The undersigned, holding a majority interest, hereby calls an extraordinary meeting of shareholders. Each word felt like a grenade armed with justice. As she ate, Denise thought back on the journey that led her here. The kitchen table murmurs in 1998, the loss of Roland, the cold betrayal of Curtis, the undercover returned the year's cataloging injustice. Everything had converged on this moment, the legal spark that would ignite the reckoning. She finished her burger, paid the bill anonymously, and stepped out into the night, the diner's neon buzzing overhead like a distant countdown. Driving home, Denise rehearsed her entry into the boardroom calm stride, clear voice the flash drive, and the notice in hand. She envisioned the stunned silence as she spoke the words every board member feared. "I am Denise Jenkins, majority owner of Creswell Holdings. Today, I call for a vote of no confidence in our current CEO." She saw their faces, the falter of Wexler's smile, Curtis's outrage, the board's unease. When she reached her apartment, Denise placed her uniform in a garment bag and slipped into plain clothes, a simple blouse, tailored slacks flats that had never scuffed a floor tile. She pinned a small Jenkins name tag to her chest, the first time she'd ever used her own name in a corporate setting. It felt both foreign and fitting. That night, Denise slept lightly, her dreams weaving through boardroom chairs and legal documents, murmurs of shocked executives echoing in the corridors. She awoke before dawn, dressed in her uniform again, mask back in place. Miss Denise would return to mop the floors at 5:45 a.m., exactly pushing her squeaky cart past frosted glass doors and unsuspecting security cameras. But hidden beneath her name tag was the power to reshape the company's destiny. As she stepped into the lobby, fluorescent lights clicking on, she felt the tension in the air, an almost tangible charge. The envelopes were already on their way to each board member's email and corporate inbox. By the time the first executives arrived for their routine morning routines, they would find emergency board meeting notice waiting for them bearing Denise's unmistakable signature. And in that moment, the legal spark she'd lit at a roadside diner would explode, revealing the majority owner they never knew existed. The silent observer was ready to become the active judge. The rot would be exposed, and Creswell Holdings would never be the same. The clock on the wall ticked to 10:00 a.m. as the boardroom's double doors swung open. Denise Jenkins stepped through heels, clicking against the polished marble threshold, her tailored navy blazer fitting like armor over a crisp white blouse. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had long since mastered the art of invisibility and was now ready to reveal herself in full. Behind her, Elliot Miles carried a leather briefcase and wore the professional calm of a well-seasoned counsel. Together, they cut an impossible contrast to the expectant room of 12 leather chairs and the massive walnut table gleaming under the chandelier's glow. Thomas Wexler, seated at the head of the table, looked up mid-compliment to a senior VP. His smug grin faltered when he met Denise's steady gaze. "Miss Jenkins," he began, voice laced with patronizing surprise. "I wasn't aware you had an appointment." Denise paused at the threshold, allowing the weight of her presence to settle. No mop, no bucket, just purpose. She set her purse on the floor, then placed her hands flat on the table's edge. "I do now," she said, voice clear, resonant. Heads turned, board members leaning forward, eyebrows arched. Curtis Banning's jaw tightened. Meredith Chandler's pen hovered over her notepad. Even Jonas Evers, the youngest director, sat upright, eyes widening. Elliot cleared his throat and uncovered the briefcase. He withdrew a thick stack of notarized documents bound in gray covers stamped with the company seal. One by one, he laid them in front of Denise's subscription agreements, amended articles, share certificates matching her signature beside Roland's. The pile looked innocuous against the polished table, but each paper was a testament to her concealed majority interest. Denise glided into the vacant chair beside Wexler's and removed her blazer, draping it over the backrest. As she sat, she met Wexler's gaze directly. "Thomas Wexler," she began. Voice unwavering. "Good morning." The politeness of her tone cut sharp against the drama unfolding. "My name is Denise Jenkins, and I am the majority shareholder of Creswell Holdings." A ripple of astonishment swept the room. Wexler's eyes flicked to Curtis, who sat frozen, his mouth agape. Meredith's pen dropped with a soft click. Jonas jabbed a finger at the documents. This can't be," he stammered. "We've never seen these." Elliot leaned forward, opening the lead folder to the original subscription agreement signed in 1998. These documents were drafted under an LLC Denise Jenkins established with Roland Jenkins, he explained, voice measured. Her contribution constituted 51% of the initial capital. Upon Roland's death, her ownership transferred fully to her. Curtis Banning's later filings do not override the original and properly amended articles. Silence fell so thick it felt like concrete. Denise's chest rose with a controlled breath. "Thomas," she said softly, "you have been operating under the assumption that you held majority control. You've made decisions, bonuses, safety, overrides, benefit cuts, believing no one could challenge you. But you were wrong." Wexler's smug posture dissolved into a mask of panic. He rose to his feet, pushing back his chair. "This is some kind of," he began, but his words faltered as board members exchanged hesitant looks. "Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be," Denise continued. "I formally call for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current CEO." She tapped the stack of papers. "Per Section 4.2 of the amended operating agreement, the majority shareholder may convene an extraordinary meeting to remove executive officers." Curtis pounded a fist on the table. "You can't do this," he shouted. "I've been running this company for over a decade." "You've been running it into the ground," Denise replied, ice in her tone. "Safety violations, ignored bonuses, hoarded, employees mistreated. I have the records to prove it." She gestured to Elliot, who extracted a USB drive from his briefcase. "This drive contains documented evidence of financial misconduct, safety hazards, and derogatory remarks about the very staff who kept this company alive." Wexler's attempt at a comeback stalled into a wheeze. He stared at the documents, at the witness in the waiting, a woman he'd sneered at countless times in the lobby and hallways. The board parted like the Red Sea uncertainty, carving paths between the directors. Denise rose, her presence magnified by every anxious breath in the room. "Thomas, hand over the interim CEO's seal and your office keys. Security will escort you out. We will reconvene this afternoon to elect a new CEO, one who upholds the company's founding values." Wexler's shoulders slumped. He snatched his briefcase and blustered toward the door, words tumbling in indignation. Security staff, alerted moments earlier by a discreet text from Elliot, appeared at the door. Two officers in crisp suits entered and nodded to Denise. "Mr. Wexler." "If you'll come with us," one said politely. Wexler turned, eyes fierce, but as he realized he was outnumbered, he pressed the door open and walked into the corridor. Board members shifted uncomfortably, some coughing, others staring while Denise sank back into her chair, the room still humming with disbelief. Curtis Banning finally spoke, his voice low and shaken. "Denise, I had no idea." His confession was barely a whisper. Meredith Chandler cleared her throat. We didn't see this coming." Jonas ran a hand through his hair and met Denise's gaze with curiosity rather than fear. Denise closed her eyes for a moment, recalling the years of mute observation, every glass she'd polished, every fingerprint she accidentally wiped in plain sight. She inhaled and opened her eyes, meeting each director's gaze. "I understand the shock," she said, "but today's outcome is not about vengeance. It's about stewardship. Creswell Holdings was built on principles of collaboration and integrity before it became an empire of profit and neglect. We will restore those principles." Elliot rose, moving to Denise's right. "The next order of business is to appoint an interim CEO," he said, voice crisp. He produced a simple resolution from the briefcase. "Resolved that Denise Jenkins shall serve as interim chair and acting CEO of Creswell Holdings until revised elections are held." Curtis's shocked face hovered at the doorway as he listened, but he did not return. Denise stood once more, easing her blazer into place. "I propose we engage an independent audit, revise our safety protocols, and restore employee benefits retroactively to the last fiscal quarter." She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to settle. "We will reinstate meal stipends, review overtime grievances, and launch a transparent talent initiative." Voice inside so that no one here ever feels invisible again. A tentative clap came from Jonas, followed by another from Meredith. Curtis, standing under the boardroom's transom window, clenched his fists but said nothing. Wexler's footsteps faded in the hallway. Denise exhaled, her chest loose for the first time in 15 years. The boardroom, once her stage for secret observation, had become her platform for reform. As directors signed the resolution naming her acting chair, the rod of neglect gave way to the promise of renewal. She straightened her blazer, smoothing the lapels with deliberate calm. "Thank you," she said softly to the assembled board. "Now let's get to work." The chandelier overhead cast prisms of light across the table, and for the first time Denise Jenkins, former janitor, secret founder, rightful majority owner, saw the future of Creswell Holdings laid out before her, waiting to be rebuilt. The morning air carried a crisp promise as Denise Jenkins stepped onto the courtyard's raised platform, the thrumming hum of neighbors pulling into parking spaces and the sizzle of food trucks warming up in the sun. It had been only 3 days since she reclaimed the boardroom, but in those hours, Creswell Holdings had begun to breathe anew. Drivers in orange vests clustered near the taco truck's folding tables. Administrative assistants trickled out of the lobby with notebooks in hand, and janitors in gray uniforms. Her former colleagues lined the edges of the crowd, uncertain smiles on their faces. The hum of conversation was punctuated by the hiss of steam from the coffee cart and the deep laughter of a warehouse foreman who'd just convinced the burrito vendor to throw in an extra egg. Denise stood before them in a simple business suit, no mop bucket in sight, and lifted a hand. The chatter subsided, replaced by expectant hush. She recognized more than a few faces: Marisol from shipping, who always swapped gossip with her at the loading dock; Cynthia Ramirez, who'd lost her leave until Denise intervened; and Alonzo, the driver, whose overtime she'd backdated. In that instant, titles and hierarchies dissolved. Here were the real custodians of the company's success. "Good morning," Denise began, voice carrying across the concrete expanse. "I want to thank each of you for coming. I know you were busy pulling freight answering calls, cleaning desks, but I thought it important we start this next chapter together." She paused, scanning the sea of faces for a moment of connection, then continued. "Many of you have questions about what's happened, about pay benefits, about why it took so long for your voices to be heard. Today I want to answer those questions." A ripple of nods and murmurs swept through the crowd. Denise reached into her pocket and pulled out a small notepad, a nod to the simplicity of her old routines. She framed her next words carefully. First, retroactive pay. Any unpaid overtime from the last 2 quarters will appear on your next paycheck. No forms, no fine print, you've already done the work and you deserve the compensation. A cheer rose from the warehouse side of the courtyard. Drivers high-fived one another. A few clapped Denise on the back. She allowed herself a soft smile. Second, benefits. Health coverage will be reevaluated immediately, and HR will hold listening sessions next week to understand what matters most, whether it's mental health support, dental coverage, or something else. You will help shape the plan. A woman in a safety vest raised her hand. Denise acknowledged her. What about safety protocols? There were concerns about locked fire exits and faulty machinery. Denise nodded gravely. We've already ordered a third-party audit. By the end of this week, every safety issue on the audit list will be addressed or scheduled for completion. We will not compromise on your well-being. As murmurs of approval grew, Denise set the stage for the signature initiative of her tenure. Finally, I'm proud to launch Voice Inside, our Frontline Ideas Forum. This is your platform to pitch improvements from lunch menu changes to process innovations. We'll meet monthly, and I'll personally review every suggestion. If it makes our company better, it will get implemented. The applause that followed was genuine and sustained no polite golf clap, but a hearty ovation. Alonzo, the driver, stepped forward and tapped his helmet. Miss Denise, he said with a grin. Never thought I'd see food trucks at Creswell's yard. This is real change. Laughter rippled through the crowd, tension melting like ice under the morning sun. Denise stepped down from the platform and wove through the crowd, offering nods, handshakes, and friendly hellos. She stopped by Marisol's table and offered a coffee refill. Marisol's eyes glistened. Thank you, she whispered. I've never felt this seen here. Denise paused a moment, folding her hands around the paper cup's warm cradle. You've always been seen, she said softly. I just forgot to look. Marisol's smile affirmed that the hard work of rebuilding trust had begun in earnest. The next hour unfolded in a cascade of interactions. Denise listened as a custodian shared ideas for quieter cleaning schedules during conference calls. An administrative assistant suggested cross-training workshops so staff could better understand each other's roles. A driver asked for a streamlined expense reporting system. Each idea was noted on Denise's notepad, her pen dancing across the page. She promised to follow up on every single one. Meanwhile, Elliot Miles circulated among the group, quietly answering questions about the new town hall process. Denise watched him from a distance and caught his eye with a nod of appreciation. His legal maneuver, the emergency meeting notice, had been the spark. This was the conflagration of cultural renewal. As the sun climbed higher, the courtyard's energy shifted from celebratory to collaborative. Teams formed around tables, some discussed safety upgrades, others charted language sessions for non-English-speaking staff, and someone floated the idea of a monthly newsletter spotlighting unsung heroes across the company. Denise moved between them, a guiding presence, listening more than talking, embodying the ethos she'd introduced leadership through listening. By midday, the taco truck's line had dwindled, and the coffee cart packed up. Denise invited everyone to step inside the lobby for snacks and refreshments, ensuring the momentum carried forward. In the lobby's open space, once the domain of mops and cleaning cart staff, mingled sharing ideas and forging connections across departments. Receptionists chatted with mechanics, warehouse workers laughed with HR personnel. And Denise watched as barriers dissolved in the warm camaraderie. Later that afternoon, Denise convened a smaller group, drivers, custodians, admins, to form the inaugural Voice Inside committee. They gathered around a conference table with notebooks and laptops ready to prioritize initiatives. Denise sat at the head of the table, not as an executive above them, but as a facilitator beside them. Your ideas will guide our strategy, she told them. We'll meet monthly, and I'll personally ensure your voices shape policy. She passed the first draft of a program plan to each member, then leaned back as they reviewed the document. Their thoughtful nods and engaged questions validated the purpose she'd set. By evening, the courtyard lights glowed softly, and Denise stood alone for a moment, inhaling the night air. The laughter and chatter had long since faded, but the shift in the building's atmosphere lingered, a tangible resonance of empowerment. She thought back to the silent years she'd spent pushing her mop through empty hallways, gathering evidence and waiting for the right moment. Now that moment had passed. In its place stood a living, breathing legacy of inclusion. Denise made her way back into the lobby where security guard Fred tipped his cap in greeting. Good work today, Miss Denise, he said with a grin. Denise returned the gesture. Just Denise, she corrected softly. Fred nodded, understanding the subtle change in tone. She'd shed the formality. She was now a peer rather than a fixture of the background. Before leaving, Denise paused by the elevator and caught her reflection in the glass. The uniform of years past had been traded for the respect of her colleagues. Her eyes shone with resolve and a quiet joy. She thought of Roland's dreams sketched on grocery receipts of the early days of building Creswell Logistics from scratch, and she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The company was not simply hers to claim, it was hers to nurture, to transform, and to guide beyond the vision she and Roland had first imagined. As the elevator doors closed, Denise pressed the lobby cleaning service button, an after-hours ritual that now felt ceremonial. She stepped off the cart and headed home, the echoes of the day's triumphs trailing behind her. Tomorrow she would return to her usual rounds, polishing floors, emptying bins, but her steps would carry a different purpose. The halls she cleaned would no longer be pathways of isolation, but corridors of collaboration. In the quiet of her apartment that night, Denise penned a message on her personal journal. The real work begins now. A company's strength lies in every voice it includes. She closed the cover and placed it on her bedside table, a personal monument to the journey she'd undertaken. Beyond the edges of her bedroom window, the city lights twinkled, each light a story, a person with dreams and challenges. Denise smiled, knowing that Creswell Holdings, under her stewardship, would shine more brightly because it had learned to listen. And in the soft glow of the night, she fell asleep with a heart unburdened, ready to awaken to a new day of rebuilding legacy, one voice at a time.